I invite Brian to come and give us our minute for mission to tell us about your work, how it's going in Guatemala.
It's so good.
As we receive our tithes and offerings, I'm sorry, Brian, to interrupt. We will receive our tithes and offerings at this time.
It's so good to be here. Blessings and greetings from Guatemala. I thought Sandy was going to be with me this morning, but we misunderstood each other on her plans. We never misunderstand each other. It's just an unusual occurrence. We've been thinking a lot of Bethany over the last 6 months since we were here in July with the changes. We pray for you often. It's so wonderful to see old faces and so many new faces here. I guess I disagree with Denise that Jack Jennings introduced Paul and Carrie. Sandy and I were going to be living with Carrie and her family in our Christian commune in her South Hill home when we moved in from the country. And we came down one weekend to get the kids used to one another and this new arrangement, and we decided we should go to church. And we said, well, where's the most progressive church we can go? In Spokane. And Carrie said, well, Bethany, Presbyterian church. And I said, you ever been there? No. And so we went. And I realized that Carrie or Paul had each other's phone number in their wallet that Jack had given them. But we went to church, and I was ready to go, standing out on the back porch, waiting for Carrie and Sandy to show up, and waited a long time. Sandy finally showed up, and I said, what's going on? Where's Carrie? And she said, oh, she's in with the preacher. They're getting together. And I went, what? How could you possibly? What do you mean? Well, they're getting together. They're going to be a thing. And I went, how do you know this? She said, I just know. Well, make a long story short, that blew our little Christian commune in Carrie's house on the South Hill to smithereens. And it wasn't until 13 years later that we got the chance to live with Paul and Carrie in their house out in Airway Heights when we were homeless on our way to Guatemala for 4 months. It was a wonderful time. You are our home church. You sent us to Guatemala to do God's mission. And it's so wonderful to hear the message today, to see Heather amongst you preaching the gospel of love. Our job in Guatemala is simple. We are called to love. That's what we do with the women of Guatemala, who we support and mentor leadership growth. It's a land of extreme suffering. The racism and sexism in Guatemala is brutal. The women we serve are in a Presbyterian women's group that's purposefully excluded from the leadership in the church. It's kind of like a women's aid society. You can bake brownies, you can raise funds, but don't mess with the elders and the rulers of your, that happens to be all men, church. I got a chance to go to, they had the annual convention every year. The National Leadership Group has an annual convention. There's 25 presbyteries in Guatemala. The majority are indigenous Mayan. In the indigenous churches, the women sit on this side and the men sit on this side. And I'd had, from some of our friends and the leaders of the national leadership team who we work with, I'd had we've been advocating for, part of what we do is more love, less racism, more inclusion between men and women, between Ladinos and Mayan Indians. And so we talked with people about that. In the Mayan indigenous presbyteries, they're real open about the racism that exists and how painful it is. I've brought it up several times in our leadership team, which is 9 women, 2 indigenous, and 7 Ladino. And it has not been pretty. The Ladino women, to a person, get angry that anyone would dare accuse them of bias. And so we've been dreaming that there might be more indigenous women on this leadership team as a sign of hope. We're standing out on our balcony of our house with some friends and leaders. Maura was one of them, and I was sharing that. She said, "We've got to," she's an indigenous woman. She's the vice moderator. She said, "We've got to get more women." And I said, "Well, let's bring it up at the convention." She said, "I can't." I said, "What do you mean you can't? You're the vice moderator, you're an indigenous woman." She said, "I can't. In front of 300 women, the majority of Ladino, mentioned that in public. You can. I can't. You're a male. You're white. You're a missionary. You're right." And I just kind of went, oh, come on. And so I talked to other leaders on the leadership team. And I guess this is a sign of hope because we're making some progress. The fact that we can even talk about this in a group is making progress. So she gave me the microphone in front of 300 women. And I preached what the General Secretary had told me. The majority of members in the Presbyterian Church in Guatemala are women. The majority of the members in the Presbyterian Church in Guatemala are indigenous. Oppressed indigenous people. And I asked the question, why is it that you women here today are not electing more of your Mayan sisters to be leaders? Now, it didn't happen this particular time, but I think it'll happen the next time. And it's a slow process. It's a different culture. And it'll be brought up again next year. We've got work priorities this year with the women to work on racism. In our 4th year in Guatemala, we can now do that. We've been approved for a 5th year. And so we'll be back home here worshiping with you later in 2019. Please keep praying for us. We get lonely there, and we feel like people of Mana. We feel like we live off your prayers. God bless you all.